Two black brothers buy an abandoned shed and discover a hidden secret. Subscribe to the channel, share this video, and watch other stories. The morning glow fought its way through the dusty slats of the blinds, casting a weak light on the flaking paint and water-stained ceiling of the small apartment. Langston Reed sat on the edge of his creaking bed, his elbows on his knees, staring into a chipped mug of tepid coffee. Behind him, the radiator clanked and sputtered, its irregular gasps of warmth the only sound in a silence that had become his constant companion. At 52, Langston was well acquainted with silence. It was a heavy cloak he'd worn since his world had unraveled. The room was sparsely furnished, a metal bed frame, a wobbly table with two mismatched chairs, and an empty bookshelf holding only a single, cracked picture frame. In the photo, a younger Langston stood beside a woman whose smile could light up a room. Naomi, his wife, his everything. 3 years she'd been gone. Ovarian cancer had been a swift and merciless thief, aided by inadequate insurance and a healthcare system that felt cold and indifferent. Langston had fought for her, selling their car, emptying their savings, and pleading for more hours at the plant. He had held her hand through the last days, whispering memories of their youth into her ear as if his words could turn back time. She slipped away on a Wednesday morning, her fingers intertwined with his. After she was gone, the world's volume turned down and its edges grew sharper. He took a sip of coffee, the bitter taste of familiar punishment. He remembered waking to the aroma of sizzling eggs and fresh toast, with Naomi humming a gospel tune in the kitchen. Now, his mornings were a colorless routine. Fold the blanket, walk to the sink, avoid his own reflection in the mirror. He knew what he'd see there. A chin covered in gray stubble, eyes burdened by sleepless nights, and a brow permanently etched with grief. A stack of unopened bills sat on the table. He knew their contents without reading them. The disability checks barely covered the rent since the assembly line in Detroit shut down, another casualty of the city's slow fade. His knees ached, and his back carried the weight of decades of hard labor. He glanced at the window, where a pale winter sun struggled against the frost. His gaze fell to a small wooden box next to the table. Inside were Naomi's letters, some dried flowers she had pressed in an old hymnal, and a folded deed he hadn't seen in 20 years. It was for a piece of land in North Carolina, near where his grandfather had lived. A wooded plot with little more than trees, a broken fence, and memories. Out of habit, Langston picked up his phone and scrolled through online listings for old tools and used equipment. Nothing held his attention until a post from West Virginia caught his eye. Vintage Pullman rail car, 1920s. Weathered, needs TLC. $700 or best offer. Buyer must arrange transport. A grainy photo showed a long, rust-covered train car sitting on overgrown tracks. The windows were shattered and the paint was peeling, but something about it called to him. Pullman. His grandfather, Solomon, used to speak of them with reverence. The Cadillac of trains, he'd called them. Langston recalled a trip with him as a boy, the scent of aged leather and the rhythmic clatter of the wheels, the countryside blurring past the window like a series of paintings. He'd slept in one of those bunks, feeling safe and adventurous. He clicked on the ad. Sold as is. Located in Mountainard. Buyer responsible for relocation. To most, it was just junk. To Langston, it felt like a doorway. Not a grand one, but a possibility. He leaned back, a subtle shift occurring in the weight on his chest. That night, he paced the floor, arguing with himself. A loud voice reminded him of his age, his lack of resources, the sheer insanity of the idea. But a quieter voice, one he hadn't heard in years, asked, "And what if it works?" He opened the box again and looked at the old deed. He remembered being on that land as a child, watching his grandfather chop wood. The memory, long buried under city grime, sparked to life. Maybe the train car could go there. Maybe he could live in it. Maybe he could build something not just for shelter, but for himself. The next morning, he made the calls. The seller was a tired-sounding man, surprised anyone was interested. "It's yours if you can get it," he said. The transport quote was steep but manageable. The county clerk's office in North Carolina confirmed the land was still his. He spent the next 3 days selling what little he had left: the television, his watch, even Naomi's old sewing machine. He kept only a few clothes, a flashlight, and her letters. When the money was gathered, he wired the payment and signed the delivery papers, his heart hammering with a mix of courage and madness. On the day he left, he stood in the empty apartment one last time. The radiator was cold and silent. His footsteps echoed off the bare walls. He picked up his duffel bag, opened the door, and stepped into the crisp morning air. Something new settled in his chest. Not quite joy, but the faint outline of purpose. The train car, a rusted relic like himself, was waiting. The transport truck groaned as it climbed the final gravel road, the forest pressing in on either side. Langston sat rigidly in the passenger seat, his knuckles white on the strap of his duffel bag, his heart a drumbeat of fear and hope. Behind them on a flatbed trailer, the Pullman car looked like a slumbering iron giant, rusted, weathered, and dragged from a bygone era. The young driver spat tobacco juice out the window. "We're close. You said the gate's past this bend." Langston nodded, his throat tight. "Right up there. Look for the busted fence." They rounded the curve and saw it, a sagging chain-link gate nearly consumed by vines and tall grass. Beyond it, a faint dirt path wound its way through the trees, deeper into the property his grandfather, Solomon, had once treasured. The driver squinted. "You sure this is the spot?" Langston managed a faint smile. "As sure as I'll ever be." The truck lurched forward over forgotten stones and fallen limbs. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy in golden patches. As they entered a small clearing, Langston saw where the old family cabin once stood, now just a flat expanse of moss and earth. A few warped boards lay near a collapsed stone chimney, the last remnants of what was. Langston stepped out of the truck, his boots sinking into the soft ground. It seemed smaller than he remembered, but it was still here. It was still his. The driver cut the engine. "Where do you want it?" Langston looked around, then pointed to a stretch of sunken rail track at the edge of the clearing, a remnant of an old spur line. "Right there," he said, "on those old rails." The process was clumsy. The winch strained and groaned as the massive car was slowly pulled into position. Rust rained down in orange clouds. Finally, with a resounding metallic shriek, the car settled onto the tracks, nestled in the forest as if it had been there for a century. Langston stood alone as the truck rumbled away, its sound swallowed by the trees, leaving only the whisper of wind and the chatter of birds. He turned to face his new home. It was worse up close. The exterior was a collage of rust and faded paint. The remaining window panes were jagged shards in rotten rubber seals. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, bent inward at one corner. Vines snaked up its sides, trying to reclaim it for the earth. He laid a hand on the cold, rough metal. It was unyielding, but it was solid. He could feel the strong bones beneath the decay. He stepped inside, and the air hit him like a physical blow, stale, musty, and sharp with the smell of mold. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light from the broken windows. The floor groaned under his weight, and a small creature scurried into the shadows. He could make out the original layout. Twin seats with shredded cushions, iron luggage racks clinging to the walls, and a tarnished brass sconce dangling from a wire. He walked down the narrow aisle, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The car was littered with the refuse of passing years. Empty bottles, scraps of cloth, and faded graffiti. It had been a shelter for the lost, abandoned and rediscovered time and again. At the far end, he found a small, rectangular window above a collapsed cabinet. Peering through, he saw the gentle sway of the trees outside. There was a strange peace to it, this rusted skeleton resting in a forgotten corner of the world, just waiting. That night, Langston unrolled his sleeping bag in the middle of the car. He laid out his few belongings: a flashlight, a book, Naomi's letters. A small battery lantern cast flickering shadows on the warped walls. Sleep was elusive. The night was cold, and the wind howled through the gaps in the metal, sounding like a sorrowful voice from the woods. Every creak and groan startled him. He whispered Naomi's name into the darkness. When he finally slept, he dreamed of her laughter, of their son running through a sprinkler, and of the crushing weight of her hand in his as the heart monitor went flat. He awoke before dawn, his cheeks damp with tears. His breath plumed in the frigid air. His body ached, but beneath the fatigue, a quiet resolve was taking shape. He looked around the car. It was broken, filthy, and forgotten. So was he. And yet, here they both were. He stepped outside into the crisp morning air, mist hanging low over the forest floor. He walked the perimeter of the clearing, planning, making a mental list: clean the interior, clear the windows, patch the roof, seal the floor. One task at a time. By midday, he had a small fire going and was boiling water for tea. He washed his face in the cold creek and began sweeping out the car with a broom he'd brought from the city. Dust filled the air, but he kept working until his arms ached. When he finally stopped, the floor beneath him was visible, solid, and real. He ate canned beans for dinner and sorted through the debris, creating a pile of usable materials: old bolts, hinges, pieces of paneling. As the sun set, painting the rail car in shades of orange and gold, Langston sat on the steps and looked out at his land. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. He didn't know if this venture would succeed, but for the first time in years, he had something to build, and that was enough. Morning came with a low mist that clung to the trees like old spirits. Langston stood outside the Pullman, watching his breath fog in the cool air. The scent of pine and damp earth grounded him. He stirred the embers of his overnight fire, coaxing them back to life. He had survived another night with no insulation or running water, and he felt a flicker of something resembling pride. He didn't see the rail car for what it was, but for what it could become. The same metal walls that now held the cold could one day hold warmth and peace. He had to believe it. After a breakfast of crackers and canned peaches, he started dismantling the pile of rotted furniture from the back of the car. Much of it was useless, but he salvaged what he could, sorting pieces into neat piles of wood to be sanded and metal to be straightened. His body protested with every bend and kneel, a familiar ache from his years on the assembly line. He worked with a steady purpose until the morning chill gave way to the warm breath of afternoon. While clearing a storage alcove, he found a loose metal plate. Behind it, covered in dust, was a heavy wooden crate. He dragged it into the light and pried it open. Inside lay a collection of old hand tools: screwdrivers, hammers, chisels. As he wiped the grime from the lid, he saw initials carved into the wood: S, or Solomon Reed. His grandfather. Langston sank to the floor, his fingers trembling as he lifted a battered, wood-handled hammer. He remembered holding it as a small boy, his grandfather's large hand guiding his. Tucked in a corner of the crate was a thick, leather-bound notebook. On the front, in faded ink, it read, "Notes, summer of 1972. He opened it, his eyes scanning page after page of neat cursive. Much of it was practical advice on repairs and planting, but interspersed were Solomon's reflections. Asterisk: the forest will always outlive the house. Build with humility. A home isn't four walls. It's the space you protect with your effort. Asterisk. Langston closed the book, a tightness in his chest. This legacy was not a burden. It was a lifeline thrown from the past, connecting him to something that had endured. That evening, he began patching the worst of the holes in the walls with scrap paneling. Using only a handsaw and his grandfather's tools, he repaired a section of the floor. The rhythmic work, saw, measure, nail, was a soothing meditation. By nightfall, the car felt less like a hollow shell and more like a workshop. He lit a candle and ate a can of stew, and the silence felt different, fuller. The next day, he drove his old sedan into the nearest town. In the hardware store, he felt the weight of unspoken questions. The clerk behind the counter watched him with a cool, detached gaze. Another customer gave him a long, appraising look before leaving. Langston recognized the silent scrutiny. At the register, the clerk rang up his purchase without a word or a smile. Back in his car, he took a deep breath. refusing to let the familiar chill of judgment settle in his spirit. He just drove back to the woods, where he felt welcome. That evening, he noticed movement in the trees. A small, scrappy boy, maybe 10 years old, stood at the edge of the clearing, watching him. Langston raised a hand in a quiet greeting. The boy hesitated, then vanished back into the woods. He returned the next day, and the day after that, slowly inching closer. "You living in there?" he finally asked. Langston set down his tool. Trying to, the boy nodded. "Looks like a train. It was a long time ago." There was a pause. "I'm Trevor." Langston, another pause. "My mom said a crazy person moved in." Langston offered a faint smile. "Maybe she's not wrong." Trevor grinned back. From then on, Trevor was a constant presence. He'd appear after school, watching Langston work, eventually asking if he could help. Langston taught him patiently, showing him how to hold a hammer, how to measure a board, how to respect the tools. The boy absorbed it all like a sponge. One day, Trevor returned after a short absence, carrying something wrapped in foil. "My mom made sweet cornbread," he said. "She said thanks for keeping me out of her hair." A few days later, a tall woman with wary eyes walked into the clearing. Trevor bounced beside her. "This is Clara," he said. "Trevor's mom." Langston stood up from the step he was building. "Langston Reed." "A pleasure." Clara scanned the clearing, the Pullman, the neat stacks of lumber, the organized tools. Her expression softened. "He talks about this place nonstop," she said. "I had to see it for myself." "You're always welcome," Langston replied. As they left, he felt a crack in the lonely shell he'd built around himself. That night, sitting by the fire with his grandfather's journal, he ate cornbread and beans. The train car was no longer just a project. It was becoming something more. Autumn arrived, painting the forest in strokes of gold and crimson. Langston rose each morning with the chill, smoke curling from a new stovepipe he'd installed in the Pullman's roof, a sign of life. The transformation inside was remarkable. The floors were scrubbed and patched, one end of the car converted into a cozy sleeping area with a cot, shelves for books, and a framed photo of Naomi. The other end was a workspace with a handmade table sitting beneath a large, refitted window. Curtains, sewn by Clara from old fabric, framed the view of the woods. On the wall, Solomon's tools were mounted with care, like treasures in a museum. Outside, a stone path led to the car's entrance. He built new steps and a small deck for sitting in the sun. He had scrubbed, sanded, and painted the Pullman's exterior in a deep forest green with accents of old brass. It now gleamed under the trees, not new, but respected, like a beloved story being told again. One bright morning, Trevor asked, "Did you ever ride a train like this for real?" Langston smiled. "A long time ago. My grandfather took me." He told the boy about the journey, the sounds, the smells, and the magic of it. Back then, Langston explained, his voice softening, riding a train meant you were going somewhere. But it wasn't the same for everyone. Trevor looked confused. "What do you mean?" Langston paused, the weight of history in his voice. "Folks who looked like me, we had to sit in certain cars. Often the worst ones. Hot, crowded. That's just how it was. Even these Pullman cars, built by the hands of black craftsmen, were mostly off-limits to us as passengers. We built them, but we couldn't ride in them like everybody else." Trevor was quiet for a long moment. "That's not fair, no," Langston said gently. "It wasn't." Clara stopped by later with a basket of vegetables from her garden. "He's got the bug," she said, watching Trevor measure a plank with intense focus. "I haven't seen him this into anything since his father passed." Langston just nodded, understanding the unspoken gratitude. Word of the renovated train car began to travel through town. Teenagers rode their bikes out to see it, marveling at the restored fixtures. They started bringing small gifts. A wooden sign, one of them painted that Reed Hope line, IST 1927, a collection of old railroad postcards. One boy brought a broken oil lamp. "Figured you might know how to fix it," he said. Langston had it working in a week. Soon, neighbors started stopping by with purpose, to ask for help with a broken chair, to bring canned goods, or just to sit on the deck and listen to Langston tell stories of the Pullman porters, who built a foundation for the black middle class with dignity and hard work. The project was becoming a place of meaning. But even as he built this new life, the past remained. He hadn't spoken of his son in years. One night, he found an old photo tucked in a toolbox. Malik, 17, in his graduation cap and gown, Naomi's arm around him. The memory of their last, angry conversation echoed in his mind. "You gave everything to her and left me with nothing." The silence that followed had lasted for years. The next day, while hammering a new bracket, an envelope fell from shelf. It was tucked inside Naomi's old Bible. Inside was an unfinished letter to Malik in her delicate script. Asterisk, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But please know, your father loved you more than he could say. Sometimes love is quiet, son. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Asterisk, the letter trembled in Langston's hands. That night, he sat at a small table and began to write. It wasn't an eloquent apology, just an honest account of where he'd been, what he'd built, and why. He didn't know if Malik would ever read it, but it was time to send the story out into the world. He sealed the envelope, writing a name he hadn't written in years, and placed it by the lantern. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and the Pullman car seemed to hum with a quiet, steady life. The letter addressed to his son sat on the table for 3 days, a silent testament to hope and fear. Langston focused on his work, building a sturdy set of steps for the car's rear door and polishing the brass nameplate until Pullman Standard number 407 gleamed. He arranged salvage train benches around a circular table he'd made from a cable spool. Above the front window, he hung a hand-carved cedar sign, Hope Line. The rail car no longer resembled a ruin. It looked like a destination. The community's embrace grew warmer. A retired librarian donated boxes of books, and Langston created a small reading room. A neighbor brought herbs in clay pots for the steps. 2 teenage girls delivered a colorful quilt they had sewn. Visitors were now common, arriving not just with curiosity, but with gifts of food, requests for help, and a willingness to share their own stories. Someone suggested a storytelling night, and to his own surprise, Langston agreed. On a cool Friday evening, the woods around the Pullman filled with soft voices and warm light from lanterns lining the path. People gathered around a crackling fire pit, while inside, a table was laden with hot cider and Clara's famous molasses cookies. Langston stood at the door, greeting each person as they marveled at the transformed interior. He started the evening with a story about his grandfather, and soon others were sharing their own memories and jokes. As the last guest left, Langston stood alone in the clearing, a feeling of deep connection warming him more than the fire. A few days later, the local elementary school called, asking if he would host a field trip for a history class. "You already teach me," Trevor insisted. "You just don't talk like a teacher." So, on a Wednesday morning, a yellow school bus rumbled up the road. 24 children spilled out, their faces alight with wonder. Langston stood on the steps and welcomed them. He told them about the men who built these cars, black craftsmen and porters who worked with pride in an era that offered them little else. He explained how those porters formed one of the first black labor unions, carrying not just luggage, but information and ideas that would help fuel the civil rights movement. The children listened, captivated. One little girl looked up at him and asked, "Is this your house?" He smiled. "It's more than that now." That night, long after the bus had gone, Langston finally picked up the envelope. At the post office the next morning, he handed the letter to the clerk. "First class, please." He walked out into the sun feeling both lighter and heavier. He returned to his routines, but a part of him was waiting. He had offered Malik the truth without demands. He had told him about the Pullman car, the community, and Naomi's last words. He had told him that he was sorry and that he missed him. 13 days later, Langston was tending the herb pots when he heard footsteps on the road. He straightened slowly and turned. A tall, lean man with broad shoulders stood at the edge of the clearing. His hair was close-cropped, his posture hesitant. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the man's voice, low and rough, broke the silence. "Dad," Langston's throat closed. Malik stepped forward. "I got your letter," he said, swallowing hard. I wanted to see." Langston took a step, then another. "I'm sorry," Malik whispered as they stood close enough to touch. "So am I," Langston said, his own voice breaking. They embraced then, the weight of all the silent years dissolving in the crisp autumn air. Later, they sat on the platform, sharing warm cider as Malik took in the scene. "You really built all this?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "With help," Langston replied. "Friends, neighbors, your mother." In a way, Malik nodded slowly. "It's beautiful." Langston looked at the boy who had become a man, the man who had found his way home. He understood, then, that redemption didn't come from erasing the past, but from the simple, steady act of trying again. As the sun set, casting the rail car in an amber glow, he felt it completely, the warmth of forgiveness. His home had been built from rust and memory, but now it was ready to welcome the world. The following morning dawned soft and dewy, the Pullman car glowing in the first light of spring. Langston found Malik by the fire pit, poking at the embers. They shared a nod and then coffee, sitting together on the platform in a comfortable silence. Two travelers who had finally arrived at the same destination after long, separate journeys. "Show me the rest," Malik said at last. Langston led him through the car. Malik moved with a quiet reverence, his fingers tracing the worn woodwork and the spines of the books. He paused for a long time before the photo of Naomi. "She would have loved this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think so, too," Langston replied. They spent the day working together, reinforcing a wall, their movements falling into a natural rhythm of shared labor that mended more than just the train car. Trevor appeared that afternoon, his face breaking into a wide grin when he saw Malik. Soon after, Clara arrived with a casserole and a knowing smile. "You must be the son I've heard about," she said to Malik. "Didn't think you were real," Malik chuckled. "Most days I wasn't, but I'm trying." Clara passed him the dish. "Then you're welcome here." That evening, the clearing filled with people again, drawn by the quiet pull of a place transformed by care. Music played from a radio as neighbors shared food and stories around the fire. Langston stood on the Pullman steps, watching it all, a mug of cider warming his hands. Malik leaned in the doorway beside him. "You did this," he said. Langston shook his head. "Not alone, but it started with you," Malik insisted. They stood listening to the murmur of a community that had once been a collection of strangers. "Are you going to stay?" Langston asked quietly. Malik hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I'd like to come back. Help out. Be around, that's enough," Langston said. After Malik left the next morning, the Pullman car didn't feel empty. It felt rooted, a place where sorrow had made way for memory and possibility. As spring bloomed, the community's life intertwined more deeply with the rail car. Trevor and his friends helped build a rain catch system. Clara organized a book swap. A local artist painted a mural on the car's side, a tree growing from train tracks, its branches cradling the stars. Langston added one final touch, a wooden plaque carved with steady hands and placed near the front step. It read, "Asterisk Pullman Hope 407. For those starting from scratch." One afternoon, as he told a group of visiting students about rust and loss and the power of hands that fix what is broken, he didn't speak of tragedy. He spoke of change and how the past could be a blueprint for the future. When they had gone and the forest was quiet, he sat by the fire and opened his journal. "You can't undo what's been done," he wrote, "but you can choose what grows from it." He closed the book and looked toward the old tracks that once led nowhere and now pointed toward a future rolling quietly forward. The rail car stood behind him, a heart beating steadily in the woods, its walls full of stories, its roof open to the sky. It was home, ready for the next soul, in search of a place to begin again.